to the first discussion of this day 2 conference. I'm very pleased to be moderating this panel. I believe it's very appropriate given the theme of the conference being time for action serving the real economy transition. As all of us are aware, there are few things quite as real as housing when it comes to Canadians and everyday Canadians and their finances. So there's no doubt that serious action is needed when it comes to affordable, suitable, and sustainable housing for all Canadians. For those that were in attendance yesterday, you may have noticed a common theme that ran throughout, and that was the need for collaboration across stakeholder groups to take collective action to make meaningful progress for these goals. And affordable housing and sustainable housing is certainly no exception for the need for collaborative action and the mobilization of capital. And with that in mind, we've assembled this very impressive panel of experts from various stakeholder groups to provide their insights on this important issue. So in the interest of hearing as much as possible from these experts, I will just jump into the discussion. I'd ask each of our panelists to give a short introduction as they begin. And I'd like to start with Marianne. Can you set the stage for the audience to outline the spectrum of affordable housing and the variety of projects that we might find across that spectrum?
For sure. Bonjour, je m'appelle Marianne Duguay, je suis vice-présidente principale à la gestion des actifs immobiliers au Fonds immobilier de solidarité FTQ. En fait, l'immobilier social et communautaire, c'est un projet immobilier qui est dédié à des ménages qui ont des revenus faibles et modestes, où le coût des loyers est adapté, est ajusté, est abordable et surtout est pérenne. Ce genre d'investissement-là ou de projets, généralement, sont gérés par des entreprises ou des acteurs d'économie sociale. Je pense notamment à des GRT, des groupes de ressources techniques, des OBNL, des offices municipaux d'habitation ou encore des coopératives. Ces projets-là, ils peuvent avoir des unités résidentielles ou des unités non résidentielles, donc pour offrir des services à la communauté qu'ils desservent. Au fonds immobilier, on investit jusqu'à 15% de nos actifs à chaque année dans ce genre de produits-là parce qu'on pense que tout le monde mérite d'avoir un toit décent et peut se loger convenablement. Il y a aussi les logements abordables qui s'intègrent dans les projets privés par des investisseurs, des développeurs immobiliers privés qui sont développés, par exemple, en fonction des incitatifs. Je pense notamment au 20-20-20, la métropole, le règlement sur la métropole mixte, ou encore certains incitatifs, notamment là, qui ont été lancés par la SCHL avec le programme APH Select. So these are the types of social, affordable, and community housings that are available. Je peux peut-être donner quelques exemples là, par rapport à certains projets dans lesquels on a investi. Je pense notamment aux projets en logement. Ce sont des projets sociaux qui permettent aux personnes avec un handicap physique ou intellectuel de se loger dans des logements qui sont abordables, qui sont adaptés avec eux. Et en termes de partenariat, il doit y avoir des investisseurs privés qui se joignent à ce groupe-là, ainsi que des acteurs du milieu, par exemple la municipalité, la ville qui peut donner le terrain ou un incitatif là, sur le terrain. Je pense notamment aussi à certains fonds qui ont été développés en partenariat avec divers groupes, la SCHL ou diverses fondations qui permettent de faire des projets sociaux abordables communautaires dans certains milieux. Et dans chacun des cas, il y a quand même des impacts là, et des intervenants du milieu qui doivent investir également.
Great. Thank you very much, Marianne, for that. I want to turn now to Julie to maybe provide a little bit more context around some of the strategies where private investors might be attracted to become partners for affordable and sustainable housing projects. So over to you.
Yeah. So, well, when we talk about like an attractive investment, we just generally talk about either the risk or the return. Unfortunately, in affordable housing, return are not that great, right? We know that. And that's kind of the point. One of the points, it's having like lowest return, but maybe a better risk management. The way, though, we can achieve okay returns is by getting better at doing blended finance, where you have a government or a philanthropic foundation, for example, putting forward some capital at a lowest rate that enable you to meet your criteria or meet your target investment. And then with the blended return, you kind of get the type of loans and of investment return that the affordable sector is able to generate for you. Then there's the type of risk, and that's a key point. If we're okay with a little bit lower returns, well, we're gonna expect some lower risk, right? And in affordable housing, it's very low risk. First, there's collateral, of course, because there's a building, but there's also all the heart of the community behind you, and that's something that we need as investors. We have to get better at assessing those risks. Having an affordable housing unit is not the same as having an office downtown. Office downtown is quite volatile, unfortunately. But having community housing, having community hubs, which we've done with FTQ, for example, those types of investments are actually very stable, because before they're going to fail, there's going to be a hell lot of the community behind it. There's going to be volunteer work behind it. The governments are going to get behind the projects themselves. So actually just looking at the downtown, the down line of the returns is not about assessing the real risks that those projects can, well, actually not create, but manage properly for investment. The other way we could do it is getting some certiorship. If you're new to this, which most of us are, get a partner to get a certiorship in your investment. The governments do this sometime. In Quebec, we have an amazing model that's called Solide, which you're a partner of as well, Marianne. And Solide just started their real estate affordable housing project with a little certiorship from the Ville de Châteauguay. A very small loan that was guaranteed by the city, and they just grew up there to 1,000 units, and they're now a model in Quebec and still growing. So there's all kinds of innovative way that we can, and innovative tools actually that we can put on the projects to actually make it happen.
Excellent. And speaking of innovative tools, let's turn to Sean, who's joining us virtually today. Sean, can you give us a little bit of an idea of what role green bonds and other sustainable finance instruments can play in financing sustainable housing and affordable housing projects?
Well, if you're raising debt, there's a market for debt that is green and addresses social concerns. In my case, I consider the issue of social housing being important to climate resilience, not just social considerations. But there's clearly a market. We now have a market globally of green bonds, about $3 trillion US outstanding. We have social bonds on top of that, close to $1 trillion outstanding. This is from a couple of billion 12 years ago. The demand remains very strong for essentially a debt instrument which looks and talks and walks like other debt instruments, but has a bonus feature that addresses a substantial environmental concern or a social concern. It's that extra bonus feature, a bit like a free set of steak knives, if you like, which gets people interested and excited and has built this market. Now, I'm not going to say for a housing project that if it doesn't meet the standard requirements to be able to issue debt, it's going to get placed. We're not talking about that level of support. But if we can get a safe, secure return, as we just heard about, not necessarily high yield, but a safe and secure. Remember, our pension funds are after security and safety above all, understandably, because they have to be sure they can pay you a pension when you retire in 5 years or 35 years. Then we can place that debt. And there is certainly appetite out there. At the moment, we still have a global surfeit of capital. That's capital chasing places to go, especially safe places and lower interest rate environments around the world compared to some of the higher interest rate environments where money had gone in the last few years. And they want green and social, and really a mixture of the both. So social housing that is energy efficient is the sweet spot. Now, of course, all social housing should be energy efficient, because one of the things that we need to provide to our tenants, to our residents, is lower energy bills at what is essentially a very minimal upfront cost. So it's not hard to deliver that. And of course, many provinces are already doing that anyway. But no, I think the depth of demand amongst institutional investors for green social housing debt is very strong. It's only a matter of how we construct it, how we support entities that are able to issue to actually come to market. It's as simple as that, really. I mean, I spend all my time around the world now. I'm in Tokyo at present talking to government agencies and business, trying to drum up more supply because I have unquenchable investor demand all around the world in this area. Not so much that it's going to give a 2% or a 10% saving interest rates, but it is going to get a slightly shaved interest rate, and it's certainly going to make it easy to place debt compared to ordinary debt. So, if you can do it, you're mad not to do it.
Thank you, Sean. That's definitely well received. And in the same vein, I'd like to turn it over to Jordy because there are some unique circumstances that Jordy can speak to with respect to de-risking as well as raising capital for particular community projects. So Jordy, can you please take us through that?
Yeah, sure. So I am the CEO of one of the national Indigenous organizations that focuses on financial management and financial and economic development for communities. And most of the Indigenous communities in Canada are Indian Act bands. And these bands have a lot of difficulty in raising capital and developing infrastructure. So they're funded typically year by year, which makes it very hard to be able to invest for the long term and invest in infrastructure. There's often very little other revenue, and there's an inability to borrow against assets that are on a reserve. So it's very hard to capitalize, save money, and or borrow money to be able to launch projects. And so we've been looking at different kinds of ideas as Indigenous organizations, and we've created a borrowing pool under an organization called the First Nations Finance Authority. And that allows nations to borrow against future revenue streams in order to build infrastructure. And what's exciting about that is that there's a lot of credit enhancements with respect to that program. It's able to borrow at the same as the government of Ontario. And through that, over time, the interest rate on municipal bonds is now greater than it would be on the First Nations Finance Authority. So there's a lot of interest in terms of Indigenous-focused finance. We also think that there's room for an Indigenous Development Bank to be able to de-risk projects, particularly infrastructure and housing-related projects. And we're starting to see Indigenous-focused bonds as well. So there was a bond issuance in Australia recently that was focused on an airport authority, and it took into account biodiversity and Indigenous factors. We're also seeing a lot more impact funds that are particularly with you guys having a focus as well on Indigenous finance. So there's an opportunity for that as well for nations to work with the difficulties of raising capital and being able to create infrastructure.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jordy. I really appreciate that insight. And from your unique seat, it's definitely something that I believe a lot of us here in the room can learn more about. I think to bring it all home and sort of wrap up what this all means for housing and the availability for everyday Canadians, I'd like to ask our panelists, Marianne, to begin just with some examples so that we can all understand a bit more in detail about what some of these projects look like and how they're financed and what the capital stack looks like and who ultimately these projects are serving.
Thanks. En fait, au fond, ça fait 30 ans qu'on investit jusqu'à 15%, comme je le mentionnais tantôt, de nos actifs dans du développement, en fait, dans ce qui est du développement durable via les logements abordables, sociaux, communautaires. Mais on le fait pas tout seul. On le fait pas tout seul, on le fait avec des acteurs du milieu. Puis je pense que c'est important de regarder comment, justement, comment on fait pour avoir un stack de capital qui se tient. Puis aussi, je pense que je résonne avec ce que tu mentionnais par rapport au fait que, on est un fonds d'investissement. Le rendement, c'est important pour nous. Il faut générer du rendement, mais quand on regarde dans de l'abordable, du social, du communautaire, le rendement risque, l'équation, elle est différente. On vient vraiment dérisquer notre projet. Puis ça fait aussi qu'on vient chercher un équilibre dans notre portefeuille parce que à la fin de la journée, on veut faire vivre nos valeurs. On s'appelle le Fonds de solidarité, puis on veut faire vivre ces valeurs-là aussi. Donc c'est pas un mauvais investissement là, que de faire ça. Je pense aussi à quelque chose qui est arrivé récemment là, avec l'hippodrome. En fait, à l'initiative du gouvernement du Québec et de la Ville de Montréal, il y a une table de travail qui a été mise en place et où on participe. Parce qu'à la fin de la journée, pour avoir un projet, il faut que ça soit gagnant-gagnant. Il faut que ça soit gagnant pour les développeurs, pour qu'ils trouvent un rendement financier. Il faut que ça soit gagnant pour les parties prenantes, pour les citoyens, pour que ce soit un développement durable aujourd'hui, puis aussi pour les gens de demain. Donc, on est très content là, de pouvoir participer à cette table, à ce groupe de travail-là pour trouver un juste équilibre. Cet équilibre-là, il se trouve aussi quand les parties viennent ensemble. Je pense peut-être à un projet en particulier là, dans le cadre du Fonds d'investissement de Montréal. Il y a quelques années, il y a eu quelques investissements qui ont été financés par la ville et les investisseurs du FIM. Par exemple, les habitations, le domaine à Montréal, c'est plus de 700 unités. Où est-ce qu'il y a eu une collaboration entre le privé, entre le GRT qui s'appelle Bâtir son quartier, le fonds et la Ville de Montréal afin de permettre cette acquisition-là et d'un parc immobilier existant et de conserver et de pérenniser l'abordabilité de ces logements-là. Je pense aussi là, au fonds Capital pour toi. Puis ça, ça résulte d'une collaboration entre le ministère des Affaires municipales puis de l'habitation et le fonds. Puis on offre, c'est un financement qui est avantageux, qui est offert à des OBNL, mais aussi à du privé pour venir développer des unités de logement. Puis on a annoncé là 14 400 logements qui vont être créés. Et ça aussi, dans ce cas-là, ça demande l'implication des acteurs du milieu, les acteurs locaux. Donc, en termes de financement, il n'y a pas un projet qui se réalise avec une seule personne, avec un seul groupe. C'est vraiment lorsque les acteurs du milieu viennent et se concertent et collaborent qu'on est capable de trouver des solutions qui font en sorte que les projets se réalisent. Puis, au fonds immobilier, au fil des ans, c'est 291 millions qui ont été investis, puis ça a permis de réaliser là, plus de 7 800 unités, 200 résidentielles, 200 000 pieds carrés d'espace communautaire. Je pense notamment à des ateliers pour artistes ou autres. Donc, c'est vraiment, vraiment important que l'ensemble des parties se concertent, collaborent ensemble, et c'est dans la mutualisation là, des efforts qu'on est capable de faire ces projets-là.
Thank you very much. I'd like to pass over to Julie to, I know you have some unique projects and definitely unique views on this, and I think we can all benefit from some of those insights. So if you might mind sharing some of the projects that you've been involved in recently, that would be amazing.
And as a consultant, I forgot to present myself, actually. So I'm a lawyer and consultant in real estate and investment, impact investment, actually. So I touch base on a lot of those projects that, namely, Marianne mentioned. And I love that you mentioned the table on Hippodrome, because what is an investor doing at just cracking the business model of real estate development, right? Well, it's because you're going to be down there you hope, or we all hope, that you're going to be down there in the end making the projects are actually happening. And this is key. The sector is not ready for your money. We need you to help us build capacity. If you were to put $1 billion in the hands of non-for-profit real estate development, they would crash. They would be in a growth crisis tomorrow morning. We need to be there with them to build their capacity and be with them at all the risk level. Not just, we can't just have the perfect projects all stabilized that's going to have a good return, or you need to be there at the risk, at the expertise risk when they're hiring their people. You need to be there at the acquisition which is the FIM actually, which is buying the land and taking it off the speculative market and putting it into the hand of the non-for-profit. You need to be there during the construction. And then you're going to be there for the long term, that are like 20 or 25 or 15 years patient capital, or just traditional investments. You need to build your own pipeline. And that's key into the success of deploying your capital into those big chunks of beautiful real estate projects. You need to be there at the start. And that's what we did with FTQ, among other things, with l'Initiative Immobilière, which is a fund that supports the feasibility study, the acquisition, and then the stabilized project afterwards. But the investors are there all through the pipeline, and they are building capacity of the sector and building quality projects that it will actually want to fund in the end. And those opportunities are out there in the system. We talked a little bit backstage about the Trinity Center Foundation, who is actually helping faith properties transition from a faith-based ownership to a community sector ownership. And those real estate opportunities are out there. We just need to help those growing organization and capacitate and empower them into seizing those opportunities.
I think we can definitely agree with that. The collaborative action is something that I think is a general theme. As I mentioned yesterday and already today along this panel, we see the necessity for a lot of stakeholder groups to get together in order to make meaningful change in this market. Jordi, you have a very unique lens to view these projects through, and I was wondering if you could provide us with a couple of examples of projects from your nations that are underway or have been completed that they're a little bit more unique than what we might see in the traditional markets.
Yeah, I mean, there's nations that we work with, and as well as other nations as well. But there's in Montreal right now, there's the Addenda development that's going on Robert Bourassa, and that's going to be 171 condos and 264 rental units, and that's a joint venture between CRECO, so the Cree of Northern Quebec, and Cogir Immobilier. And so that's an example of a nation working together with a developer, in that case, to drive more market housing as well as commercial. But there are other examples where there's nonprofit housing. So, for example, the Missinaibi Cree in Toronto are developing under the Toronto's Housing Now initiative, some housing for seniors, and they're working with the Ellis Don community builders. So they're developing 184 units, 50% with 77% of average market rent, and then 15% at 40%. So really targeting seniors that are in a bind in Toronto, where the prices are of life are escalating rapidly. There's also in that unit going to be community space for ceremonial. But there's other developments as well going on in Edmonton and Regina, and then closer to home for me with respect to the Squamish and their Senac development. So they're looking at creating 6,000 units in False Creek or Kitsilano. And this is going to be on reserve housing. They're doing a joint venture with West Bank, one of the big developers in Vancouver. And it will be transformative, having that many units. I think it's 8 towers. Worth of predominantly residential, and some of that residential focusing on band members and subsidized housing for them, but also there'll be commercial and a focus on some office as well, and so really transforming that neighborhood and looking at ways to go and house those individuals, particularly band members that aren't able to otherwise find housing.
Great, excellent. As you can see, we've got a variety of examples from our panelists, and hopefully that gets you all thinking about ways to mobilize capital to help support these different types of projects across the spectrum of affordability, sustainability, and suitable housing for all Canadians. What I really want to dive into now is the not so fun part, and that's really what are the major impediments that are keeping these types of projects from reaching scale. And we have some obviously very insightful panelists here from that regard that have developed many projects or been involved in the development of many projects. So I think right now we need to address the elephant in the room, and I'm going to start with Marianne and get your thoughts on the major obstacles that we see in the space.
I think one of the impediments is time for zoning, time for getting everybody together, le temps pour s'entendre, le temps pour arriver puis être prêt à avoir un montage qui est ficelé pour aller faire une offre d'achat avant, par exemple sur un actif existant, avant que le marché parle puis vienne changer ça. Je pense aussi que le capital, on parle du temps, on parle de l'argent, c'est un autre défi. Lever le capital, s'assurer que le capital est là, des fois aussi certains fonds, certains certains programmes, il faut cocher les cases, il faut répondre à plusieurs questions, mais ça peut être des fois très, très spécifique. Alors, faire rentrer un bon projet dans un certain programme, ça peut être parfois laborieux et difficile. Donc, le fait d'être en amont, de collaborer avec les différentes parties prenantes, ça nous permet d'être capable de faire arriver des projets de façon plus organique, plutôt que d'avoir à être réactif. On peut être proactif. Puis je pense que l'exemple de l'hippodrome, je reviens avec, c'est un bon exemple où est-ce que les parties prenantes sont autour de la table pour trouver des solutions pour que les investisseurs privés puissent aller faire des investissements qui à la fin vont fonctionner, vont être viables. Donc je dirais que mes deux, c'est time and money and fitting a square peg in a round hole.
Absolutely. We hear this consistently across the board. As many of you are aware, I finance commercial properties and have done so for many, many years. And some of these same themes keep popping up as far as impediments for projects. And Julie, are you seeing similar or different, or what are your
experience? Definitely. Well, we talked a little bit about capacity earlier. I think I cannot outline more how key this is. To be present when there is not a project yet is so important, because you need to make sure that the expertise is there to produce the project down the end. You mentioned Marianne, I think you're right on when you're talking about putting all those actors together, and especially in the community sector, there are experts at making all of those programs fit together, and it is. The main reason why the projects at the moment are failing is not because there's not enough money at the government level, it's because it doesn't arrive at the same moment with the same criteria, period. And that's, by the way, that's one of the key parts that you could play, is playing the bridge between all of those programs that are out there existing. And there's a will from the government, there's a will from the community, but this zone where you need to have all the programs aligned, confirmed, and you still need to move forward with your acquisition. You need to buy the property to take it off the market, or somebody else is going to come and buy it. So this agility is a key strength actually from the financial sector that could be used to the benefit of those programs and those to those community projects. So it's an impediment, but it's also an opportunity, I think, that we should collectively seize.
Yeah, that's a great point. These programs and aligning of all the different programs that are available. We have definitely an expert here in Jordy with working with programs and alignment of programs. And Jordy, maybe you can speak to us a little bit about the unique issues with respect to the growing population of Indigenous folks in these urban areas, and how we can develop sustainable communities and housing and programs that are culturally aligned.
Yeah, certainly the numbers of Indigenous people that are in downtowns in major cities has increased substantially. These people are coming from a number of different communities. They may not be necessarily from the Montreal area, if in Montreal, or the Vancouver area when in Vancouver. And so, but at the same time, each of those people's nations wants to find a way to help and assist their own citizens. But it's difficult to access capital. As I said earlier, if you're an Indian band and you're on a reserve, it's very challenging to raise money, because the property rights are not as certain as they are off reserve. But communities need to find a way to get more reserves within downtown areas. And so part of that is finding the parcel and financing the parcel, but then it's also how do you go and work with the federal government and the municipalities to turn that parcel into reserve land downtown. And so that process can be quite time consuming. And so we're working right now with our partners to try and move that process along more quickly for nations. And it's also once you get a parcel within a reserve, you need to figure out a way to incentivize development. And so the First Nations Lands Advisory Board that we work with has a process in place to be able to create long-term leases and long-term zoning for parcels of reserve. And so by doing that, that gives more certainty to developers, and there's more interest in terms of developing the Indigenous economy and developing property on reserve. But certainly, there's going to be a need for nations to work together, and in terms of housing projects. And so some of these reserves will need to be so-called joint reserves, where nations are working with other nations to be able to house a group of members.
It's definitely, again, you see that theme popping up over and over again of collaboration among stakeholders. So if you feel like I'm beating on that theme, you're right. And I think that's really, as we heard, some of the impediments that are in our way with respect to moving forward with scale projects that can be useful, sustainable, and suitable for housing Canadians. I kind of want to move over a little bit to Sean. You mentioned earlier that there is a sort of an insatiable demand for certain types of debt. I'm wondering if you could speak to us about potential ways to align, as you heard our other panelists talk about the need for capital. And so do you see a path forward to align the need with that demand? And could you talk to us a little bit about how you might see that progressing?
Well, look, there's no way around creditworthiness. You've got to establish creditworthiness, whatever you do, if you want to get debt. That applies to an Indigenous social housing community or Fannie Mae in the US that's now issued $110 billion of green social bonds to support multifamily dwellings. So we're stuck at that. And some of the things we're hearing from our panelists are about how you go about establishing creditworthiness, get together project, which, of course, is more than just the money side. It's about governance issues. It's about navigating through systems to get permissions and all of those things. They're all part of the process of getting a project mature enough so it can raise debt with creditworthiness. Now, there's shortcuts. The simple shortcut is that a creditworthy institution issues the debt. The very first social housing bond that was produced, a sustainability bond, by Île-de-France in Paris, which is the city government of the area around Paris. I think it was about $500 million. It was for social housing, green social housing, as in energy efficient, where quite simply the city guaranteed and issued the bond, the money is placed. So that's a shortcut, which it doesn't open to everyone, but is open to many others. Now, I'm talking from an international perspective here, right? The second bond that financed social housing was issued by North Rhine-Westphalia, a state in Germany, that issued a mixture of renewable energy and social housing assets in one bond backed by the state. So in that case, it was really easy for investors because it's a state bond, it's a good credit rating. Oh, and by the way, it goes to help green social housing. What's not to like? There are other bonds being issued in the US by housing authorities, existing housing authorities that already have a credit rating. That's the key point. The Massachusetts Housing Finance Agency or the California Municipal Financing Agency have issued bonds for these sorts of things. So the simple shortcut is you need an institution that already exists that can issue debt to be able to issue debt to finance it. And they are typically municipal organizations or state and provincial organizations. Now, to put together a bond issuance by a community housing or a social housing co-op, which has happened in the UK or in France, is much harder if they've never done anything before. It's no different to raising any debt in the sense it's hard to establish the credentials to get someone to give you the money because we all know the hoops involved, the confidence the lenders need to have, money's going to repay, the relationship between interest rate and that confidence level, all those things are standard. The main thing is that the extra heightened demand for green and social will get more conversations and greater access to capital as long as you meet those minimum hurdles. I can't comment too much on the difficult route to get there by many organizations because it's not a new story, but it's still a painful story. It's all sorts of organizations go for the same sort of thing. All I can say is that if we can find a way to issue debt that is perceived to be creditworthy, and there's lots of aspects around that, but for larger ones, it's a credit rating, then it can get placed. And we can finance a lot more than is currently being done. I mean, I'm saying to municipalities around the world, We need to grow our social housing portfolios. There's a shortage all over the place, except maybe in Singapore, where something like 75% of all people live in social housing. But in other places, governments need to step up more, and they can provide the credit support. And then in those sorts of examples, it becomes the community agency who negotiates with the government for an appropriate governance around the project they're working on, but then it's supported and financed through government issuance. So they're the simplest ways. That's the bulk of the market. The sort of things we're hearing today are tougher. Absolutely. I don't think there's a shortcut, I'm afraid, but I think my fellow paddlers are very clear on how to do this and what to do, and it is possible. It just takes longer if it's a separate small agency doing this. Of course, the other problem is that debt buyers, bond buyers and so on, typically prefer larger projects, so smaller projects are much harder to place. There are in some countries, the opportunity to issue community bonds or raise debt from local communities. We've seen that in the US with $2 to $3 million bond issuance programs. I don't know whether that's worked in Canada. I'd be interested to know. But that is possible. But that requires a good local distribution, which is typically a partner who's willing to promote it to their lists. It's still got to get regulatory approval, legal advice, and so on as part of the process. But smaller sums can be raised for a smaller project, should that be the case.
Excellent. And again, we hear the need for partners, the need for collaboration. And I'm going to actually, yesterday I didn't see a lot of the panels leave room for questions. I think maybe just the keynote at the end. We have 7 minutes left, and I think I'd like to leave some room for the audience to address the panelists with questions. I feel like there's an opportunity here to really pick some very insightful brains, and I'd like to open that up. Anyone?
Thank you, Grégoire Baillargeon from BMO. Curious to see how you've seen banks, especially in some of the sort of distributed finance models around some developments, how you've seen banks participate in creative ways around affordable housing, and what kind of guarantees have actually worked to maybe unlock the banking sector and participating more?
I can take that one. Well, for example, we're working at the moment on an amazing project called Présenté, which is actually the mutualization of assets already owned by the community sector. You know that throughout Canada, we have about 8,000 cooperative and non-for-profit in housing, among which 3,000 are in Quebec. We have a very fragmented ecosystem in terms of non-for-profit existing housing. Just in Quebec, it's $5 billion worth of assets that are fragmented. So there's no way we can leverage it if we don't get all together at the same table. And that's what Présenté is all about. It's about getting a guarantee on existing assets and providing a line of credit to deploy a new project. Well, the providing line of credit is something that only banks can do. They can go on capital market, get capital, and then emit a loan to whichever new project we want to put into place. That is using existing tools, and that's a path to innovation, right? As a lawyer, that's the way you innovate, even in law. You take something that you know work and you just put it into a different sector. You cannot innovate all across. Like, I'm not going to ask the banks to change, or even the investors. You're going to use the tools that you know, that you feel comfortable with. You're just going to use those tools differently or in another way with different partners.
Good.
Oh, there's another after.
The question is for Mr. Sean Kidney. I find the discussion about involving municipal government in issuing bonds to unlock the financing of social housing very interesting. Do you think one of the constraints is municipality are concerned about their own credit risk, in that if they start issuing more, that affect their own as well ranking and debt ability to get debt for their own needs?
Well, social housing for the citizens of municipality are their own needs. So, this is central to what cities should be doing, is my first response. So they should be considering that in terms of the panoply of things they're supporting to deliver on the needs of citizens. Now, whether that's supporting another agency who's delivering social housing, which will need to have some conditionality to meet the needs of the city involved, or whether it's building their own, is a kind of separate issue. That's one. Of course, every institution has to worry about its debt load and its debt level, although views about that have changed since 2008 when suddenly debt skyrocketed everywhere in terms of levels of debt. Typically, if we are creating any investment that pays a reasonable return over time, that's of course going to be subject to the ongoing management of social housing and ensuring revenues can match expenditures and so on, then it's a good investment. You could do it, if necessary, you could do it in special purpose vehicles. So some cities might have an arm's length vehicle, which they provide a guarantee for rather than issue the directly, which gives them a little bit more management control of it. But I'm going to say the primary issue is that the well-being and support of our citizens is the responsibility of municipalities. And I think it's a simple discussion to think about the creative ways you can ensure the well-being of our citizens can be addressed. And clearly social housing in one of many different forms is a policy decision by the municipality about how it gets met through whichever vehicle, direct or separate. That's all it is. So it shouldn't be. But, like if Vancouver's borrowing money at 200% of the annual revenue of Vancouver, yes, it's a problem, whether it's social housing or not. That's a separate issue about the city's management of its finances, I'm going to say. I hope that makes sense.
Good morning. So thank you very much for some of the very insightful comments. One of the things that's been very consistent, not only in this panel, but over the last day and a bit, is around the need for collaboration. So that's come through very loud and clear, especially on a tricky topic such as affordable housing. So I commend the work that I'm hearing that's been undertaken currently. But I note there was no mention of our national housing provider in any of the conversation. And I would just like to get your input around where you believe they should be engaging in terms of the collaboration that's needed to address what is a very wicked problem.
I can jump in a little bit on that, but do you want to add something first, or I can start. I think it's a delicate balance between having a national, like a supranational organization, and having local embedded communities. And you have to find the right balance and the right role between what can you do at the macro level and what needs to be embedded with the people that are actually going to use the product. So I think it's a delicate balance. I think depending on the ecosystem, you're going to have opportunities to take different roles. And one of the key things we did, we are in the process of setting up a real estate affordable and green fund for residential housing, and with the major foundations of Montreal. And in setting up our criteria, so what type of projects do we want to fund? One of our key posture was saying, I'm not going to tell the groups how to deliver their mission towards affordable and green housing. I'm going to let the experts talk. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them to explain to me how are they affordable, how are they providing service, how are they green. So it's a different kind of posture. Instead of being prescriptive on how you should do your mission, which is quite like colonialist or paternalistic posture, we're taking the back seat and we're saying we're gonna let you drive. We're gonna give you all the tools to do your job properly, but you're gonna just refer back to us explaining how you did it and why it was good. And we're going to make sure that we're going to have the expertise on board just to validate what you're saying, of course. But to empower the communities is also part of creating affordable and green housing.
Yeah, I think when the when the cascading of the funds goes to the local actors, I'm thinking about the GRT, les groupes de ressources techniques, or les offices municipaux d'habitation, the co-ops, the people who are connected on the ground. I think when the funds cascade there, it's when projects are most successful. So everybody has probably a different role in creating capacity, creating availability of capital. But at the end of the day, oftentimes what we've seen is those best equipped to make sure it happens is the people with boots on the ground. So when I speak of collaboration, I think collaboration at various levels of micro, macro is really fruitful, because you have the governance, you have the subject matter experts, the wherewithal, and also, well, the subject matter experts for real estate is a local business. So the actors for Maine and Maine are often the groups that are there. So everybody has different roles, and for example, CMHC has been collaborating in a number of funds which we're involved with, which at the end of the day creates results. Similarly with Le Fonds Capital pour Toi, with various partners, an initiative from Ministère des Affaires municipales et de l'habitation, which again focuses on making sure that those who are identifying projects initially are local actors, and we ask for participation from the municipality or from local private actors too, from a governance and a capital stack standpoint.
Excellent. We're a little bit over time, but I don't want to leave without asking Jordy, who is our most expert person on the panel with dealing with federal programs, if you had anything to add with respect to that.
Oh, I mean, CMHC is there and involved in some of the projects of which I was talking about, particularly that Squamish development in downtown Vancouver, to the tune of, it's definitely over $1 billion, and might be $2 billion. So there is financing that's being provided by the federal government and the center on some of these housing projects. But I don't know how comprehensive the strategy is, but thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Jordy. We are over time. I just want to thank all of the panelists for their insight, their expertise and professionalism throughout the process of organizing this. Thank you to the audience for your time and attention. We really appreciate that. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference.